I'm another kind of cliche in that I pretty much always have wanted to write and have written, I guess, because, I mean, my mom will gladly whip out a little stapled book that I wrote in first grade, which ends with the letters DN instead of the end. It's sad, in first grade I still thought it was DN. And then in middle school and high school I wrote novel-length fan fiction, all of which still lives online. And I still get reviews for it. It's really interesting to get that feedback. And then in college I decided it wasn't enough of a challenge to be a freshman. And in a very academically challenging college, I wanted to try National Novel Writing Month, so I did, and I just really fell in love with the process and have been writing, novels pretty much ever since. So that was my path.
I really got interested in writing in 9th grade, but it really wasn't until I went into college and I spent my summers working at a summer camp in upstate New York, Kutsher's Camp Anawana, up in the Catskills. Same camp I went to when I was a kid, but now I was a counselor, and I got to be known as the camp storyteller. And I found there's a huge amount of power being a storyteller, because you can go into a cabin and command absolute silence just by your presence in the room, because if the kids aren't quiet, you just go to another cabin and tell the story. And so I had to make up stories to tell. And so it sort of became a matter of pride, coming up with these stories that would captivate them and capture their attention and get them to stop having pillow fights and actually go to sleep. And the kids all said after that first summer, Neal, you got to write one of those stories into a book. I would read it if it was a book. And so during my first year of college, I wrote one of those stories into a book and came back the next summer and gave it to them and had copies of it for the kids to read. And I sent it off to like 30 different publishers and they all rejected it. And my first 2 books were never published, and they were both based on stories I used to tell. And the third one also was based on a story that I told, The Shadow Club, and that was the one that was published. And that one ended up selling to the first publisher that saw it, except for the fact that the other books didn't sell to like the 30 publishers I sent it to. So I always think, if I would have given up because I didn't sell those first 2 books, I would never be a published author. And I just that time came when I had gotten good enough, having written those first 2 books, to get a book published, and I've been pretty pleased with it. Pretty pleased that I've gone on to write stuff for young adults, all because of those stories I used to tell at camp.
I hear a theme of perseverance. Anyone else? Yes.
So you all have so many different kinds of interesting stories that you come up with. Where do you get your inspirations from?
You have the mic.
Is there a 4-letter
I'll
word
go back
for
the
that?
other way.
The ideas never come when you expect them to come. They just always come from things that are happening in the world around you. For me, if there's something that's bugging me that's in the world and I want to figure out, if I'm thinking about things that are going on, I'll try to figure out a way to tell a story that speaks to it. Not necessarily about it, but somehow allegorically relates to it. And those kinds of stories excite me. The ideas, though, I never know when those ideas are going to come. They never come when I want them to come. I could stare at a blank page and start bleeding from the head, no ideas come. But I'm in the middle of the night, I'll wake up and have that idea that I write down.
Yeah, I usually start, this is kind of backwards, I usually can't start writing a story unless I know exactly who the main character is, and I tend to almost build the stories off of the characters themselves. It's a voice that I want to listen to more and explore more, and I think that's why a lot of my stories end up very character-focused, even among all of the action. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting, weird way of doing it, admittedly.
I get a lot of my ideas from people watching. So I always tell people, if you see me hovering near you in a mall, be careful what you say, because it might turn into a book one day. One trilogy I wrote was called He's So, She's So trilogy, and it just basically came out of my sitting in a coffee shop, kind of watching the world go by in Ridgewood, New Jersey. I don't know if anybody came in from NJ like I did. But basically, it's this town where they have like multi-million-dollar homes on one side, and then the kids live in apartments on the other side. And I sort of was just watching all of them as they came out of school, and like some of these kids were like rushing off in their waiters' uniforms to their after-school jobs, but then other kids were like driving their brand new SUVs down the street. And I was thinking, like, what must it be like for these kids to all go to school together and to coexist with those vast differences in the way that they're, living their lives? And that was where the idea for that came from. I also just recently, I had a dream the other day that Chris Hemsworth was my boyfriend. Great dream. But in the dream, he was like giving me this look and like making me pretend that like we weren't together, and I could tell for some reason that it was for my own safety. And when I woke up, I was like, I have to make a book out of that. And I wrote down this like 2-page proposal that is not perfect, but you know, you just never know where these things are going to come from.
Does your husband know you wrote about a proposal from Chris Hemsworth?
A lot of my inspiration comes from, I have like an active imagination. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I'll just be walking down the street and I'll see something and I'll think, oh my gosh, what if there was a ghost that lived up there and he, you know, and my head just starts kind of going. So sometimes I'll get inspiration from just random walking around, living life. And then also kind of along the lines of some of our other authors, sometimes it's an issue. It's something that I'm curious about, and I want to try to understand people and what drives them, and like specific topics a little bit better. So, you know, if it's a medical condition, or if it's people feeling alone, if it's bullying, things like that. Like sometimes I'll just shape the entire story around trying to figure out why people do the things that they do.
Yeah, mine's a little bit of everything. I feel like Anna's character to me was kind of out of this fascination. When I was in college, I went to school in a college town, and the story is set in Evanston, Illinois, which is the home of Northwestern University. And when I lived in both of those places, I remember looking around and seeing all of the high school students and wondering what that must be like to be a high school student in such a serious college town where it just changed every May and every August as students came and went. How strange that must be. And that really stuck with me from the time I was in college. I felt it again when I went back to Evanston, to Northwestern, and it's just always been one of those things I kind of wanted to dig into and think about a little bit more. So that was kind of the inspiration for that character. The next book I'm writing has been inspired by my friend's daughter who has OCD. So my main character has OCD in that book, and she's just an amazing girl, and I can't wait to write her story and learn more about her condition and how she deals with things, because she's a neat person. So yeah, so I feel like it's everywhere, and I'll be reading magazine articles, and there's always like one little tiny piece of the story that I think that's the story. Like that would make a really great story, not the main focus of the article. There's sometimes just a little nugget in there that piques my curiosity, and I'll write that down.
I'm basically a thief. I see things I like in other stories. You know, I'll be watching a TV show and I'll be like, oh, that's a really interesting characteristic that character has. Like, that's a really interesting relationship or a really interesting, situation. And then all those things just kind of bump around in my head. I call it head stew, which sounds really gross. That's how I think of it. And like eventually they kind of form into other stories that are my own and not blatantly ripped off from other things. But like for instance, the idea for All Our Yesterdays, I couldn't sleep one night, and I got up at about 3 or 4 in the morning and turned on the TV, and the Terminator was on.
Yes.
So I was watching the Terminator, and I was thinking, I was like half asleep, and I was like, okay, what if the killer robot was actually the good guy instead of the villain? And then I had just seen Mean Girls a few days before, and I was like, okay, what if he was a teenage girl instead of a killer robot? And that literally is where the idea from. As silly as that sounds. So yeah, I basically just steal things from better writers.
How do you put those two together?
There's an old quote. Talent borrows, genius steals. Can we have a big round of applause for our wonderful authors? Now, they have, all these authors would really, really, really love to sign books for you. In fact, they would love to sign many, many books for you. So if you have not yet had a chance to look at their books, they're all up front, they're all for sale, and we thank you all for coming. Who is my, I believe, Valerie, you're my point person? I am. Okay, you're gonna run the line? Yeah. Where's that? Okay. This is where the line starts. If you all form a line going this way, we'll